everyone, I'm Jasmine, and just as a refresher, I applied for PPE at Oxford, which is philosophy, politics, and economics. So kind of getting right into things. Oh, does this work? Okay. So I guess like the first thing I kind of wanted to address was what was so unique about an Oxford education and what kind of motivates kind of like, I guess, people to apply in the first place. And for me, that was two things. Firstly, the collegiate structure. Which I think is modeled in some Australian universities to some extent, but not to the extent in which Oxford kind of conducts things. So firstly, Oxford is one university, but in reality, it is just made up of 43 different colleges, which all kind of group together and work together to function under one university brand. So I guess for people who've read Harry Potter before, they function kind of how Hogwarts houses would function. So this includes dining halls, who would live in these dorms. And what this collegiate structure really allows you to do is to meet a lot of students studying different courses and expands your worldview. For potentially anyone who's looking into university in Australia, a lot of the times, a lot of your socializing and the people you meet will be from societies or from clubs that align with your interests and within kind of your comfort zone. So for me, this, I guess, aspect of Oxford was really important in why I kind of chose Oxford, in the sense that I wanted to meet people who had different perspectives and different life experiences to mine. However, please bear in mind that a lot of societies and extracurricular activities are still available in Oxford and are conducted under a university-wide scale. So you still get to, meet and interact with, I guess, students, peers who are studying or, share similar interests to you. So you kind of get a really good balance of both. The second thing I kind of want to talk about, and this is, I guess, pertinent for Cambridge as well, is that we have a tutorial system which is conducted within the college itself. And basically what the tutorial system functions as is one-on-one or one-on-two sessions with a world-leading professor in your relevant field. So it looks like you would still go to a few large lecture courses and stuff like that, where you'd meet a lot of other students. So for example, if I'm studying philosophy, politics, and economics, maybe in my first year, I'd go to, a philosophy introduction to like 20th century philosophy course or something like that. But a lot of the actual learning and a lot of your actual homework and assignments and stuff like that is done on a one-on-one basis with a professor. So I would have a tutor for politics, a tutor for philosophy, and one for economics. And what this allows you to do is gain a really good in-depth understanding through the conversations you have with that professor. And it really stretches you in a way that, a large, I guess, like lecture style hall or, even examinations that are really generalized wouldn't really do. So it looks like really in-depth feedback on the essays that I would write, and really good discussion of any new material I would learn. That was another really big factor, and I think something that is super unique about Oxford. So after I've kind of sold out, what is so unique about Oxford, I guess what I kind of want to do next is, kind of step through who are they looking for? Given that their university and the way they teach students are so unique, what kind of unique attributes of students are they then looking for? And they mainly look for candidates who demonstrate, first and foremost, academic ability, and second of all, potential. So by Oxford's definition, these two are slightly different from how, we might traditionally interpret them. So how does Oxford assess academic ability? So firstly, they kind of use your existing school grades to assess your academic performance, and this mostly looks like your predicted ATAR, so pretty, I guess, usual in that sense. And I guess it's important to flag that the vast majority of Oxford offers are conditional. They do give a very small percentage of unconditional offers, but that is extremely rare. And you are given a place, or you're labeled an offer holder, and you're not actually accepted until you can provide evidence that you have attained a certain grade in your HSC exams. Now, this is an ATAR of over 98 for most courses, which a 98 ATAR is a very good ATAR, and it's certainly a very high ATAR. But for a lot of us who might be, looking into, for example, law at UCID or even medicine at UNSW or UCID, a 98 ATAR is very much below the benchmarks of like a 99.5 or a 99.95. So it's certainly a high ATAR, but it is not to the ATAR requirements, which a lot of our top courses in Australia at our top universities are requiring. So that's a really interesting thing. They're also looking for success in subjects relevant to your course of interest. So as a PP applicant, they really didn't care if I took any sciences at all. So for example, if you're applying to, let's say, like PPE as well, and you took physics in your final years. Even though you did well in physics, potentially if you got in a state rank or you're representing Australia in the International Physics Olympiad, they really don't care unless you can demonstrate how physics specifically ties into philosophy, politics, and economics. So my achievements in a lot of my other subjects, such as like geography and stuff like that, they don't actually count for a whole lot during the application process. They're only really looking for your ability and your, I guess, academic ability in the subjects that you're applying for. And last of all, they kind of look for proficiency in the subject-specific examination. Now, this isn't a factor of all courses, but for PPE, that was thinking skills assessment, but quite a few courses will have a subject-specific examination that you do have to take. And I guess a much more interesting question is, what does potential look like to Oxford? First and foremost, potential looks like a genuine interest and fascination with their subject. This is really important, mostly because so much of the teaching is one-on-one. Professors really don't want to teach a student who, only, applied for law at Oxford because they thought law was, super prestigious, when in reality, the student isn't super engaged in those discussions and they're not very fun to teach. So a genuine interest and fascination with your subject is super, super important. Secondly, potential for growth and improvement. They're really looking for students who are really only just starting out in their academic journey and not students who have already burnt out and kind of burnt all the potential in high school. So what this kind of looks like is that, students demonstrate an ability to kind of conduct self-learning and are engaged in the process of learning themselves, rather than treating learning as simply, sitting in a classroom, completing homework on time, and, trying to study well and do well in exams. It kind of looks like our understanding of learning extends far beyond the classroom and kind of like touches on a range of different co-curricular activities as well. And lastly, they look for potential to thrive within their unique tutorial system. So again, touching on that really unique one-on-one opportunity to interact with Oxford professors. So Oxford tutorials are known to be a really combative and almost brutal environment. And a lot of tutors often give very harsh feedback because of the academic rigor and the high standards they hold their students to. And Oxford understands that different people learn differently, right? So a lot of exceptionally strong candidates, they might have, perfect grades, they might have demonstrated a genuine interest in their subjects, they might ultimately be rejected from Oxford because Oxford professors, after interviewing them or, interacting with them in some sort of way, have come to the conclusion that in this really specific, intensive one-on-one, environment, they won't really learn well or they won't thrive in their teaching style. So a lot of the times, a lot of people who get rejected from Oxford aren't really rejected because they don't meet the requirements. It's because Oxford professors don't think that they are best suited to this really unique style of teaching that the university offers. So that's really important to consider. So after kind of, looking through, what Oxford is looking for, let's look at some traits of successful candidates. So firstly, candidates who are successful are most likely and oftentimes engaged and passionate about their subject. Oxford professors are really, really good, especially during the admissions process, to weed out candidates who are faking being interested in a subject and those who have genuine interest in their subject. 2, independent learning. A lot of the learning conducted within Oxford, within those one-on-one sessions, looks like a debate. It looks like a conversation between two different people, and it looks like you being able to interpret texts that you've read, for a piece of homework or assignment yourself, bringing that in and then getting something out of that, which is a really unique insight. And a lot of the times, the content that you're studying will be from primary sources themselves. So, for example, for philosophy and politics especially, most of my learning will be conducted through writing 2,000-word essays for each subject every fortnight. So it kind of looks like the workload of about, 2,000-word essay per week. A lot of that will be research work, and a lot of that will be arguments in which I've had to formulate and tackle with, thinkers like Kant, thinkers like Freud, stuff like that. It's things that I have to learn by myself. Where the tutors come in is after you've consolidated your thoughts, argued them out in an essay and presented it to the tutor then challenges your thinking and challenges the logic behind your arguments. So the primary form of learning that you do get at Oxford starts with you yourself. Thirdly, the ability to kind of critically and reflectively think. So Oxford in particular really likes students who can approach a question in a really unique way, and especially how they respond to failure. So different questions in terms of the way you approach them. I'll talk about this later on when I'm talking more about the interview process, but they're really looking for students who are able to look at a problem, break it down to its simplest parts, and able to kind of extract information out of it. And when, for example, they argue a point that is then proven wrong, how they take that feedback and how they improve upon their point or reaffirm their existing point. So they're really looking for students who can think for themselves and by themselves. Lastly, it looks like students who can clearly communicate their thought processes. Because, like I said, if in an environment where a lot of the learning is done through one-on-one or one-on-two engagement, if you aren't able to express your opinions clearly and your arguments clearly, then the tutor can't really engage with you in a way that is meaningful. So therefore, even if someone can have really, really good argument skills and write an amazing essay, if they aren't able to speak on that essay, then the tutor can't really teach them well. So therefore, even though a lot of students who are really successful, again, because they don't suit that one-on-one teaching style, they're ultimately rejected because Oxford doesn't think they'll get the best bit out of their education at Oxford. So how do we kind of achieve these different traits? So I'd say, especially for students in years 7 to 9, I would definitely try different co-curricular activities within your school. This was really integral to me, especially because the only reason why I got into philosophy in the first place was, I think, somewhere during term 1, year 8, a friend of mine was like, hey, Monday lunchtimes, they have a philosophy club that's run in our school. And basically, the only reason why we went to that very first meeting was because it was too hot to sit outside, and we really wanted to find a room that we could just kind of chill in, and that was air conditioned. And sometimes they gave out a bit of free food, lollies and stuff like that. So we're like, okay, added incentive. But then I actually ended up staying at that philosophy club, and that genuinely fostered my interest and fostered my love for reading and arguing philosophy throughout the rest of my high school years, and ultimately led to my decision to apply to Oxford. So definitely try different co-curricular activities within your school, try to find your niche, and then, work on developing that niche, especially if it's a genuine interest of yours, because you will be self-motivated to do so. Secondly, definitely I'd attempt different competitions around the school, especially I would highly recommend debating, public speaking, stuff like that, simply because it forces you to kind of consolidate your ideas, about certain social issues or about issues that you might have thought of yourself in a way that is coherent and present them in a way that is convincing. So I think especially I did a bit of debating myself, the different ideas and the different, I guess, social justice issues I encountered in every single debate was always really, really interesting, and it really expanded my worldview. And oftentimes after the debate, I would be much more interested in what I learnt from that debate than the act of debating itself, and I would just do additional research on a specific area, such as climate change, or some sort of legal area, or justice, politics, something like that. So I definitely say try to attempt different competitions, because oftentimes they force you to encounter material and encounter topics and issues that you might not otherwise seek out. Lastly, I'd say just consume a variety of content covering loads of different fields. What this looks like is reading a lot of books and news articles. If reading is not your favorite thing, I would also recommend a lot of different interesting documentaries or infographic YouTube videos. And I say really in whatever, text you're engaging with, whether that be through a video or through a physical book, critically engage with it. Don't just kind of watch a video and then move on to the next video, or read a book and then move on to the next book. Make sure you try to really break down whatever arguments they might be presenting or whatever ideas they might be introducing within those texts, and then ask yourself, does this make sense to me? What is the logic behind what they're trying to argue here, and why is that correct, or why do I think that is wrong? Does that kind of make sense? rather than just, I guess, like passively, like, I guess, consuming a lot of content. Critically engaging with content is the key here. And lastly, I guess almost a benefit of this is that because you're interacting with so many different fields, you can form a lot of different interdisciplinary links and insights between the different subjects. So for me, I think apart from philosophy, politics, and economics, I also really loved English and geography in school. And from English and geography, I definitely gained a lot more insights into philosophy. And from my, I guess, like engagement with philosophy, that definitely helped me out, especially in English. So in a lot of ways, the insights you gain from one subject are transferable across the field to another. Okay, for years 10 to 12, I definitely firstly continue with that wider reading and engagement with different contexts, with different contents. But however, I'd really recommend you to start deepening your engagement with your chosen subject and find your niche within it. So rather than just, I guess, like skimming, like different news articles about certain events, or, just reading widely around one subject area, I'd really recommend for you to kind of dig deep and find your niche in these certain subjects. So for science, I didn't really do science myself, so can't really say much. But a lot of things that I see my friends do is undertake additional research. And for me, I did philosophy. I would just participate in like essay competitions regarding my particular interest. So I would only really sign up to the essay competitions that I had a vested interest in, especially in year 11 and 12, because I only had so much time on my hands. Kind of moving on, because I'm running a bit over time. I have a timer here and I talk a lot. My apologies. I'll speed through the rest of this. So keep in mind when you're considering an Oxford applications, don't do things for the sake of trying to make your application appear more competitive, and don't pursue a subject you have little to no interest in. Again, I'll stress this again. Admissions officers and professors who will be interviewing you at Oxford have a lot of experience and can easily tell who is faking their interest and who is genuinely interested, because they interact with genuinely interested students on a day-to-day basis. And when they interact with you, if you get to the interview stage and you aren't behaving like you're genuinely interested, they can see right through that, even though you're putting up a really good pretense. So, components of the application. Speedrun. Firstly, your preliminary round. It looks like you have your predicted final grades, so predicted data, a personal statement, slight technicality in this, it will be changed for applicants seeking 2026 entry. You often require teacher's letter of recommendation, sometimes the subject-specific exam, and sometimes even a written work you did for school. So the personal statement, it's about 600 to 700 words. It's 4,000 characters long, but that's the rough equivalent. And it's a chance, an opportunity for you to demonstrate what fascinates you about your chosen subject, and demonstrate how you have engaged with your subject through the books you have read, research you have conducted, conclusions you have come to. And it really is an opportunity for you to, again, show how you have gone above and beyond to pursue your academic interests. Secondly, for the subject-specific exam, oftentimes this is weighted equally, if not more, than your predicted grades. And they often don't test you on pre-existing knowledge, they test you on aptitude instead. So your ability to critically think and respond effectively to questions. So for my, I guess, thinking skills assessment for my course, a lot of the times I wasn't dealing with philosophy, politics, or economics. It was more like picking apart logical arguments, a little bit of mathematical reasoning, which I didn't like that much, and a really fun essay writing component at the end. So for the interview, this is extremely unique in the sense that it completely deviates from our understanding of like holistic interview, which a lot of, especially US universities do conduct. You won't be asked to introduce yourself or highlight 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, etc. It is essentially a practice tutorial under the tutorial system. And what Oxford professors are interested in is 1, teachability, and 2, whether or not you suit that combative learning, that combative teaching style that they use. So it's just a rough gauge of how you would actually learn as a student in Oxford. And it looks to be about 2 to 4 professors interviewing you about your course. So for me, it was terrifying. I had 4 professors kind of staring at me down on a Zoom meeting, and then they just kind of blasted questions at me, and I just responded to the best of my ability. Generally, they begin with an open-ended question, but the structure can vary by course and by college. So for example, for PPE, a sample question that like one might be asked are our deaths bad for us? You might then respond with a yes or no and give a simple reason why, and then they'll start picking apart your arguments. And I guess based on your response, professors then ask further questions to challenge you, and so on. throughout your performance in the interview, professors kind of assess firstly your ability to think on your feet outside of your comfort zone, your approach and attitude to solving problems, clarity when expressing your ideas, and last and most importantly, your passion and enthusiasm for your subject. Because no matter how proficient you are in certain skills and abilities, if you're not interested in the subject, they would rather give it to someone who's more interested in the subject that can work and develop those skills and abilities a bit more. So in summary, what the application process for Oxford looks like is that they're really looking for students who they want to teach. And what that looks like is students who are firstly demonstrating that they have academic ability in the first place. But secondly, students who are genuinely interested in the subjects that they want to learn. And thirdly, students who are able to kind of operate and perform well in this kind of really combative tutorial style. So hopefully that was, I guess, helpful for you guys. I know that this was especially a bit rushed towards the end, but I hope that was good. And yeah, feel free to, I guess, like contact Toplogic or contact me directly if you have any more questions about the Oxford application process. Thank you.
I'm CJ and I applied to Cambridge University last year and I received an offer from Trinity College for maths. So I hope today I can just like help like run through what like why Cambridge is such a good school to apply to and I guess how to get in. And yeah, okay, let's get started. So as an overall kind of overview, I think Jasmine might have touched on this, but applying to the UK, it's very different to applying to many other like countries such as the US because the UK is very subject specific. So during your whole stay at uni in the UK, you will be mainly just only doing courses and classes from that one subject. And of course, the degree is going to be that one subject. And it just focuses on really, really deep insight on that one area or one subject. And applications are usually very merit-based. That means a lot of it will be based on your ability in the subject compared to, for example, once again, the US, where they look at your ambitions, your character, your personality a lot more. So I guess why Cambridge? Cambridge is obviously a great school. It has a great reputation, but I would say the main benefits of Cambridge is the connections and also just the academic rigor in many of the courses. Of course, I can only really speak for mathematics at Trinity College, but most colleges at Cambridge for most subjects, one of the best courses in the world for many of the subjects academically. And here are just some stats of Trinity College. Alumni have received like 34 Nobel Prizes. So if you think your child, or if you are a child who is thinking of applying overseas, then if you think you're very into like research and academic prowess and just like focusing on one subject rather than general broad learning, I think not only Cambridge, but the UK would suit you very much. So I guess we should talk about what kind of people actually get admitted to Cambridge. Um, so yeah, I'll say the most desirable qualities is very similar to Oxford, like Jasmine already talked about, but academic excellence, perseverance, passion, and potential. And I'll go through what each of these really mean. So how like Cambridge admissions, how they look for these qualities in students. For academic performance, a lot of it's going to be school grades, such as like class rank, mark, and ATAR. But also, as Jasmine has pointed out, uh, what's really going to matter is the subjects that's related to the major you're applying to. For example, I applied for maths, so they wouldn't care as much about my English rank because my English rank wasn't horrible, but wasn't great. But they would care a lot more about my maths rank. And like usually there's this other thing that I'll touch on later called conditional and unconditional offers. Usually Cambridge does require most applicants to have an ATAR of like 98.5 or 99.5 or higher for Trinity College, by the way. But yeah, they will mainly look at your academic performance, basically how well you know your own subject, like how much you learnt about it, how you went above and beyond to just like discover more about it. And yeah, so the next quality is perseverance. This is mainly because like Cambridge is very competitive, especially Trinity College. And basically very, very high pressure, very competitive. You're gonna be like it's gonna be really, really tough. So they want to look for people who are able to persevere through really tough times and just do the work and make it out. And the third thing is passion. This kind of ties in with perseverance, but it's really, really hard for students to continue working hard for a subject that they don't really have a genuine interest for. And that's why they want to look for applicants who are genuinely passionate about what they are doing. So many times they can tell from the personal statement or your short answer questions that an applicant might be very smart, might be very great at the subject, but they might not exhibit the passion in their subject that they're looking for. And lastly is potential. Many students are really well read, well learned, and they will know a lot about maths, lots of university maths, maybe even first year, second year, third year. But that doesn't necessarily give a huge advantage in the application process. So Cambridge Trinity College, especially for maths, they're not looking for someone who necessarily knows everything about maths already. They want to look for someone who has learning potential. Jasmine also touched on this because Cambridge, at the end of the day, is a school. They want to choose the best candidates to kind of create and make even better. So they want to look for someone who has that potential to learn more and more. Okay, so I'll go over the actual application process. So the UCAS application is the first step. So UCAS is like a website. If any of you are familiar with the UAC, which is the similar website for New South Wales universities, basically UCAS is like a dashboard. You'll have in when I applied, I had the personal statement, but very soon it will be replaced by the short answer questions. Um, you also have to submit grades like a transcript, and you also have to submit a reference letter from a teacher. And the next step, if you do well in this UCAS application and you're chosen for the interview, of course, is subject specific, and the format is very, very different for every uni and every college. So I'll touch upon that later as well. And lastly is the offer, which can be unconditional or conditional, which I'll explain in a bit as well. So for the UCAS application, short answer. So what's the admission like officers are looking for from the short answer is usually you want to demonstrate really exceptional insight into your area, very deep insight. And this might not just be great school grades. Like a lot of students have great ATARs, great grades, but they're unable to demonstrate this exceptional insight. And where this insight usually comes from is from outside of like extracurricular activities. This includes like projects, competitions, awards, and experiences. For me, I talked about my research, I talked about the competitions I did, and I talked about my experience in maths camp. And when I talked about these, I guess it is to showcase that I have ability in mathematics. But the most important thing to actually demonstrate was what I learned from these experiences and how I grew as, I guess, a mathematician. And for anyone applying to any other major, I think they would want to showcase how they evolved or grew or understood more about their area or their field. And then there's the reference letter. This is usually from one teacher, and usually it's going to be a teacher who's teaching a subject related to what you're actually applying for. Like, for example, I got my maths teacher to write my reference, and he wrote a really great reference. But what this reference letter, what you wanted to do is actually showcase your behavior and your engagement in class. And you wanted to showcase your personality almost, because other aspects of the application aren't really able to show who you are as a person and and whether you're interested in the subject. I think many applicants do sometimes lie on their personal statement or short answer and kind of like fake their interest in their subject. I think Jasmine has also touched upon this. And the reference letter is usually a really great third person way to describe how you are as a student. And I'll talk about the actual interview now. So selection for the interview, I believe, is actually very competitive for Cambridge and slightly less competitive for Oxford. I might be wrong on this. And I think it's harder to pass the interview for Oxford, but slightly easier to pass the interview for Cambridge. But yeah, the interview has really, really different structures, not only between different universities, but even between like different Cambridge colleges. For example, I was Trinity College. One of my friends did the interview for Christ's College, Cambridge, and our formats were different. But I'll just share my experience of the interview applying to Trinity. There was a 60-minute exam of 10 questions. This is for math, by the way. And there was some difficult Olympiad slash like hard high school mathematics style questions. They were pretty difficult to complete, and I think I completed about 8 or 9 questions in the time. And then there was a 45-minute discussion. So this 45-minute discussion is really, really important because they're not looking to see, oh, you solved every question. You're like really great at problem solving. they kind of see how you respond to failing or how you respond to getting stuck. Personally, I was stuck on one of the questions, and they really looked for how I responded when they gave me a hint and how I could think really quick on my feet and think really creatively to use that hint to, I guess, solve the problem and do something new. So this kind of ties in with the potential idea that the admission officers are looking for. They're not necessarily looking for someone who can solve every single maths problem or like know everything about maths. They want to look for someone who can respond to new information and use that new information creatively or very smartly to do something new. So I'll talk about the unconditional and conditional offers now. So unconditional offers, they're basically they get you the offer, you can just attend the school, no problems. And conditional offers, however, which are much more common, there's usually an ATAR requirement. And this ATAR requirement, I wouldn't say is especially low either. So I touched upon this earlier, but for Trinity College, it is 98.5 to 99.5 usually. Personally, my offer required 99 ATAR. And there's this other condition, which is the sixth term examination paper, also called STEP. And this is basically Cambridge's own mathematics entrance test. And I think it's used in most colleges. But basically, most people do this after receiving the conditional offer. And usually they ask for a grade 1, which is usually the top 20% of all test takers for this test. So I guess that was just the actual application. But to get from like where people are now to actually ready for the application, I'll go from the start. As Jasmine mentioned, it's really important to find your niche. So UK applications, since they are subject specific, it's actually sometimes better to be really, really good at one subject rather than like an all-rounder, but not specifically good at any subject. And when you're in like year 7 to year 9, even year 10, it's just really important to find that one thing you're like decently good at, but more importantly, really, really passionate about that you can keep pursuing. And to do this, I would just recommend try out activities, competitions, experiences, like a bunch of extracurriculars, maybe school clubs. It can be on anything. It doesn't even have to be on a school subject. It could be about like, for example, Jasmine does PPE. It could be about maths. It could be about science. And also like just reading and learning ahead in many areas because most UK universities they are very, very academic, so they prize this idea of like knowing stuff. Not like knowing too much, but just like reading ahead, learning outside of the classroom, and just like extending your learning outside of the school curriculum. And I'll talk about what you can do specifically for mathematics. So what I did was a lot of Olympiad competitions and a few projects and a bit of research. And usually Olympiad competitions are very, very competitive. I'm sure you guys have heard of the AMC AIMO. I think I'm actually teaching a holiday course on that at Toplogic. And basically, usually most of the successful Cambridge applicants from Australia historically have been like top 25 in the National Olympiad Maths Camp or have been in the IMO team. And many, many others who are slightly lower might have not have had the like ability in maths or the insight in maths to actually get the interview. So I think the easiest surefire way to get into Cambridge for mathematics is to just climb up the Australian Olympiad system. And this starts with a few competitions like AMC, and then AIMO, and then once you get into the national camp, like junior, intermediate, senior level. And yeah, but I do want to stress, I think Jasmine has also touched on this as well. Don't do things just because you want it to look good for the application. It's to admission officers, a lot of the time, if you talk about an activity that you only did to put on the personal statement or short answers, it's really, really obvious that you're faking it sometimes. And if it doesn't really benefit you and doesn't really help you learn and you don't enjoy it, there's honestly not much value to doing these activities unless it actually completes your application. Many times you will discover much more like significant insights or experiences just from doing what you enjoy and challenging yourself to learn more. For example, I wouldn't do something related with like science or like society and culture, for example, because I'm more interested in maths. So I just kept pursuing a lot of mathematics related experiences. I went to maths camp and made many, many friends talking about maths, but also talking about other stuff. And it actually helped me for like as a mathematician and also as a person. I did many competitions as well. Sometimes doing too many competitions can be bad, but I did many competitions and was also able to challenge myself in training, in like improving myself, a lot of self-reflection about maths. And I think that's also something else that's really important, is that you should really self-reflect on yourself as an applicant and as a person, because that's where all the exceptional insights and exceptional experiences that you can talk about in your personal statement and short answers come from. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, like I just want to touch on the overall UK application process as a whole. Cambridge is really great if you or your children kind of want to challenge yourselves in a specific area or a specific subject. Other areas, other places like the US might be better if your children want to learn more generally, for example, a liberal arts education. And yeah, it's really important to find your niche once again. Just finding that one thing you're passionate about can lead to so much potential. Doing and like pursuing something that you're not really interested in can be really tough, and in the end, it might lead you to give up. But if you're doing something you're truly passionate about, that can be the motivation that can help you keep going. And yeah, thank you.
So I'll be doing the US application portion of today's seminar. I specifically applied and have been admitted to Harvard University, but one key difference between sort of UK and US universities is the common application. So a lot of what I'm talking about today will be applicable to many, if not almost all US universities. So hopefully, even if you're not thinking about applying to Harvard, it's still helpful for you. So firstly, in terms of what are some differences and why I specifically applied to the US and Harvard, the first is the idea of holistic admissions. So unlike Australia and unlike the UK, the US admission system is very holistic in that it does not just revolve around your academics. So getting a 99.95 ATAR or a 1600 SAT does not mean you're going to get into a US university. In fact, many people with 1600 SATs with 99.95 ATARs have been rejected from these top unis. So the US uni system and the admission system wants to see who you are as a person. They want to see what kind of activities you do. What have you been spending your time in high school doing? And I think if you're someone who has a lot of interest, is very passionate about their extracurriculars, I think this is the system for you. Secondly, there is a lot more freedom. You apply generally to a college, not a course or a specific degree. So, for example, unlike the UCAS or UAC, so unlike Sydney, Australia or the UK, you don't have to say I'm studying law or I'm applying to a law degree or a maths degree. You apply just to the college. And so, for example, at Harvard, we don't have to actually declare what degree we are studying or what degree we are taking until halfway through our second year. And we get the first 1.5 years while we are at Harvard to take a range of courses and experiment and see what we're interested in. And I think that is something that, as someone who wasn't 100% sure as to what I wanted to do for my undergraduate, really appealed to me. Thirdly, Harvard and many top US unis, but not all, are what's called liberal arts colleges, which means that even if you've declared a degree, for example, in biology or whatever subject it may be, you have the flexibility in your curriculum to study a range of different courses, even ones that fall outside of your course pattern. So I know people, for example, who are doing, for example, they study economics and applied math, but they've taken philosophy courses. And going to liberal arts college wants to give you the best education to set you up. And that includes taking sort of general courses as well. But it means that you've got a lot more flexibility in what you study. Other reasons why I also applied is obviously the opportunities and prestige that comes with these universities. The level of education is really world class. You get access to, Nobel Prize winning faculty members. You get speakers that come to your class who've worked on the World Bank, the Treasury in the UN, and things like that. But obviously, that does come with an extremely hard process. The admissions rate as a percentage for your top Ivy League universities has recently been sitting at around less than 4%. This year for Harvard, it was, I think, 3.59%, and that was actually the highest it's been in 4 years. So obviously, a lot of this does come with the fact that it is a super competitive admissions process, but I'm going to try and break it all down today in terms of what that application looks like. So firstly, what is the actual application? It is called the Common Application. So the Common App administers the university admissions for thousands of universities in the US. Almost all of the top universities in the US are on the common application. The one exception is MIT. MIT does their own application internally. I personally haven't applied to MIT, so I'm not familiar with that, but that information's on their website. But all of your other Ivy Leagues and your top universities in the US, they are on the common application. What the common application essentially means is there's one part called the Common App, obviously, which you fill out, and that's your grades, your extracurriculars, your activities. You fill that out once, and that gets sent to every single college that you apply to. And then each college has their own set of extra stuff they want. So the idea being you don't have to fill out thousands of separate applications or, however many if you're applying to multiple unis. You fill out one common part that gets sent to all of them, and then you just edit the extra bit that each uni wants you to talk about. So Harvard is on the Common App. Your other Ivy League universities are all on the Common App as well. This is the portal that you'll be submitting your application through. In terms of key dates relating to the Common App, so for the admission cycle coming up, or for any year, the Common Application opens on the 1st of August. And in terms of the application deadlines, you must, if you're applying early, these are the dates for Harvard specifically. For Ivy League universities, they generally follow this. Other universities, it really is different, but this is specifically for Harvard. The early application deadline is November 1st. If you apply early, you'll be receiving notification of your results by December 15th, roughly. If you're not applying early, the deadline is January 1st for the application, and you get notified at around March 31st on what's called Ivy Day, where all Ivy universities release their decisions. A couple of things to note about this timeline. Firstly, in terms of whether or not you should apply early, Harvard is restricted early action, as most top unis are, which means if you apply early to them, you can't apply early to anyone else, whereas regular deadline, you can apply to as many unis as you want. If you're going to apply early, the admissions rate technically is higher. I think a lot higher, almost double, if not more, the admissions rate overall. But that is because there are less applicants. But that pool of applicants who apply early are all much stronger than those applying to the regular class. So if you are someone who thinks you have a good chance and have a very strong application, I would recommend applying early because you do just get the benefit of an early notification. So for example, I was told that I made it to Harvard December 15th, which meant that I didn't have to enroll in a Sydney domestic university, whereas if you're waiting until March 31st, you have to go through the full enrollment process of enrolling in a domestic university and then unenrolling once you've been admitted, whereas I've basically been on a half gap year and I haven't had to enroll in a university. One other thing to note about this deadline, if you're applying early, is that November 1st is almost always around the last week of the HSC exam block. So for me, my last HSC exam was October 27th, and that was chemistry, and November 2nd was the last exam of the exam block, which was physics, which I didn't do. That means that if you are going to apply early, firstly, it will be with your ATAR estimate, but secondly, you need to get all of your application done a lot earlier because when you're in that HSC exam block, you're obviously not going to be spending time writing your application. So that's why a lot of people do tend to apply regular deadlines so that they can wait until the HSC is over. But if you can get it done early and you feel like you'll be a strong candidate, the option to apply early always is there for you. I'm going to now go through the different sections of the Common App, and there are quite a few, but this excludes all of the administrative stuff. But there's generally 6 main parts to your application. The first is your academics. So that consists of a school-provided transcript of your grades from year 9 through to year 12. If you're applying early, you'll apply with your ATAR estimate. If you're applying regular, you'll apply with your actual ATAR. If you get in early, they will ask for your final ATAR anyway, so that really doesn't make a difference. But just know that it will be your ATAR estimate, so your trials and other results internally will matter a lot. Class rank is also going to be provided in there. Not all schools actually provide the official class ranking. So for example, I went to James Roos and Roos did not release your overall class rank. So we would get our ranks for individual subjects, but unless you were, they wouldn't release your overall class rank. So keep that in mind. It's not provided by all schools. There's also your standardized testing. So that's either the SAT, which is out of 1600, or the ACT, which is out of 36. Personally, I did the SAT. The SAT is much more common. It is now fully digital. In terms of what you should aim for, I would aim for you should aim for a 1500 plus generally is my opinion, and a 1550 plus is quite competitive. You can take the SAT as many times as you want. So there are multiple sessions for it. So if you don't do too well the first time, you can always retake it. One thing I do want to say about academics, which I hope I've made clear, is that academics alone will not get you into a top US uni, but a strong foundation is a prerequisite. So simply having a 99.95 ATAR won't get you admitted, but if you don't have a high enough ATAR initially, it's unlikely that you'll be admitted. So you need to have strong academics to sort of get your foot in the door, but after you get your foot in that door, your academics are not going to contribute any more to your application. In terms of preparation, I think the first thing is just prepare for the HSC normally as if you're attending school in Australia. So aim for the highest ATAR you can. I would say if you can get a 99.8 plus, that's a very competitive score. I would probably aim for a 99.5 ATAR, but a 99.8 plus is probably a very competitive ATAR for the US. 99.5 is quite competitive as well, but I've seen people with ATARs, low 99s that still get admitted. As I said, it's holistic. In terms of preparing for the SAT, there are three main resources that I used. The first is Khan Academy. So the SAT College Board is the organization that administers the SAT. College Board actually partners with Khan Academy to have a range of online sort of courses and practice questions that you can take on Khan Academy for the digital SAT. So I went through those in particular for English. To be honest, if you're in year 12 and you're doing at least math advanced, the math portion of the SAT, in my opinion, is not that difficult. It is the English portion that is harder. So personally, for example, I got a 1570 and that was 800 on math and 770 on English. Secondly, Blue Book is the actual application software that the digital SAT takes place on. Once you download that software onto your laptop, there are 4 practice tests which are marked, full practice tests that you can take. So do those, but don't do them all straight away because once you get rid of those 4, you can't do them anymore, obviously. So be strategic with how you do them. Take one initially, then save the other 3 for after you've done some preparation to see where your weaknesses lie. I remember my results on the practice ones, I was getting between 1510 and 1550, and I ended up with a 1570. So it's not the most accurate, but it is quite a good determinant. If you have specific struggles, I would recommend investing in a SAT prep book for a specific portion of the SAT. There are ones that cover the entire SAT, but I don't think that's too useful because it's very unlikely you will struggle with every single part. For example, personally, my biggest area of struggle for the SAT was grammar in English. Like there's a section in the SAT which is about like where do commas and semicolons go and dashes and hyphens and things like that, which you don't really have to think about too much at school. So I bought a book that was just about digital SAT grammar, and that really helped me. As I said, you can sit the SAT as many times as you want, but check the principles of your individual college. So some colleges will do what's called super scoring, which is if you do 4 SATs, they'll take your highest scores. Some will take your highest math score and your highest English score. So you can get an 800 for English one time, 800 math for another time, and that will give you a 1600. Some will require you to report every SAT you take. So if you take 6, they will want you to take all 6, report all 6. So each college will differ for that. You can see that information online. Make sure you're clear as to what their policy is. For example, for Harvard, I think they want you to tell them all of the times you've taken the SAT, but they do that you report your highest score. They just want you to tell you all of the times you've taken it. Personally, I sat it once, and that was in year 12, March of year 12. People say that's normally quite late. People as young as year 10 can take the SAT and get quite high scores. I would probably recommend sitting for it the first time in year 11. I think I left it a bit late, but the SAT is, I think, pretty important, even for some unis that are test optional. So for example, Harvard until the class of 2030 is test optional, so for the next 2 years, which means you don't have to submit an SAT, but having a good SAT, I think, does benefit your application if you can get one. The next portion of your application is your activity list. So the Common App allows you to fill out 10 activity slots, and the information they require is the activity type, your position, the organization name, and a description. They want also the grades you participated, the timing of the participation, the hours you spent per week, and the weeks you spent per year, and whether or not you want to participate in college. You have to organize this from most important to least important. Now, the important thing is that you need to be concise. So those numbers there are the characters you get. You get 50 characters for your position, 100 for your organization name, and 150 characters, not words, for your description. So it's very common for people to use acronyms, abbreviations, symbols. So for example, school, SCHL, international, INTNL. Instead of saying 1,000, just writing K, because you don't have a lot of space or room to communicate to that. In terms of my advice, I'll group activities and honors together and then go through my advice. The third part is honors. So you get 5 honors slots as well. Now, these must be awards, not activities. So for example, saying you do debating is an activity, coming first in the debating competition would be an award for your honors section. You need 5 of them. And for this one, you only have 100 characters and that's it. You've got 100 characters to say what your award is, what grade you got it in, and then the level of recognition. So the options are school, state/regional, national, and international. Obviously, the order is important. International is going to trump national, which trumps state/regional. So you want to aim for as many national, state/regional as you can. If you can get an international in there as well, that's awesome. Obviously, that's very hard to do, but try and maximize non-school based honors where possible. In terms of my advice for preparation, so similar to what Jasmine and CJ have both said, in junior years, explore a wide range of extracurriculars. Don't rule anything in, don't rule anything out. Find a solid set of extracurriculars that you're passionate about that you can commit to in your senior years. Now, I say a solid set because you've got 10 slots to fill in the Common App, and that's quite a lot, and 5 activity honors slots. If you can't fill up those 10, it generally does reflect sometimes poorly unless you've got stellar activities and maybe you've got 5 super, like, I don't know, if you had 5 international activities, they probably wouldn't care if you couldn't fill all 10. But it's more than likely not the case that you want to fill up all 10. So you need to have a solid set of extracurriculars you're passionate about that you can commit to in your senior years. And this doesn't just mean attending or participating. Make sure you're involved or you have a leadership position. So for example, being a member of the social justice club at your school will really do nothing for your application. If you're a leader of that club, that might help. But simply participating or showing up or being a member, unless you can show how you've contributed or been involved, really isn't going to help. But if you are, for example, a member of a club, you don't have a leadership position, but you're actively involved and you can show how you've contributed, that's fine as well. Secondly, you want to pick one main area of focus that you want to deepen your involvement in and dedicate time to being the best in this area that you can be. So for me, that was debating, but there is no one answer as to what this has to be for you. Find one sort of niche area that you're going to become the best at, best at that activity. Fourthly, I'd recommend don't neglect honors. So a lot of people pick up the extracurriculars, but they don't apply to enough competitions or things. So when it comes to filling out that honors section, I know a lot of people who have really strong extracurriculars, but their honors section was a lot weaker, simply because they had all these great positions, but they didn't apply to enough competitions. So make sure you're applying to enough competitions and you're able to fill that out. I recommend aiming for an upside down T. So what that looks like is over here on the right, I've got a diagram of the upside down, the base is having a well-rounded base of activities. So you need to have a well-rounded base of activities that you are actively involved in and you can show you if you contributed to them. But then you want a spike in one area. So that's the one area of main focus that you are deepening your involvement in, and you want to become the best you can at that. As I said, for me, that was debating, but I know people who've that spike has been in politics, in history, in science and research. It can be absolutely anything. I get questions from parents often as to, should my child do music or sport or should they do debating or this activity? But there is no best activity. There is no correct activity that they look for. The best activity for your application is one that you are passionate about and one that you can excel in. So you should never be taking an activity for the sole purpose of the application. So none of the activities I took, I did. If I wasn't applying to the US, I still would have done all of those activities the same. That's because if you're passionate about those activities, it is what is going to make you want to be involved and show the contributions that the US unis care about. So there's no formula, there's no easy way out. There's not a suite of activities you can take that will lead you to being the best. You just need to make sure you are passionate about one area and you can excel in it without neglecting, of course, your well-rounded base as well. The fourth part of the application is your personal essay. So for the common application, it's 650 words. And this is the opportunity, the topics that you could write on for my year. They are generally the same every year. Personally, I wrote about the first one, which was some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. And I talked about debating, which was my main passion, interest, and how that links to my cultural heritage and language and the intersection of those two. But you can choose any of these. And if none of these work for you, you'll notice the very last one is share an essay on any topic of your choice. So for the personal essay, you can genuinely write about absolutely anything. But in terms of my tips, the most important thing is that whatever you write about, you must be authentic and genuine. This is your opportunity to talk directly to the admissions officer. So imagine you were sitting across the table with your admissions officer and you were having a conversation with them, but that conversation only lasted 5 minutes. What would you say? Because for those 650 words while they're reading it, that is your time to directly talk to the admissions officer. You don't have any opportunity elsewhere in your application to do that yourself personally. Your interview is not with your admissions officer, it's with someone separate. So your personal essay is your only chance to talk directly to the people who are deciding to admit you. So make sure you are being authentic and genuine and you are maximizing it. Start early and redraft. I really regret not starting early enough. I left mine very late, but I would really encourage you to start early and redraft because it is such an important part of your application. And because it is a holistic system, having a really strong personal essay can compensate for weaker parts of your other applications sometimes. That being said, if you have the time for redraft, I would get feedback from close friends or teachers. So I think I gave my essay to one friend, one teacher, and both my parents to read over. People who know you well and can, see if your personality is coming through and things like that. It's important that you don't want to try and cover everything. So go for a slice of life. So I focused on debating and my cultural heritage, but there are so many other things I could have talked about. For example, my interest in law or advocacy or politics. You have 650 words, which is not a lot. It's shorter than most of your average English essays or assignments. So you need to make sure that you are not covering too much in one go. Pick one thing and do it well, but make sure it's one core part of your application. Your personal essay, importantly, is not an opportunity to show off. Don't start listing your extracurricular activities and the awards you've achieved. If there's maybe one major part of your application that you're showcasing and you want to mention one award, you can. But for example, debating was the strongest part of my application. I didn't mention any of the roles I had as a debater or any of the awards I had won in my personal essay. It's not an opportunity to show off. It's an opportunity to showcase your personality and your voice, most importantly. So make sure that your personality and your voice is coming through very clearly. The fifth part of the application is your recommendation letters. So each university has different requirements, but they will all at minimum ask for one letter from a counselor, which in Australia will be either your principal or careers advisor, and a teacher who has taught you for the last 2 years. For Harvard, you must submit one counselor recommendation letter and 2 teachers, and then you have 2 optional letters, which can be from anyone. I think most importantly with these teachers, you need to make sure that they are teachers who will speak to your personality above all else. Because if your teacher is going to write you a very, one about how you're very academically strong and involved in class, but they don't talk to your personality, that's not the kind of person that these unis want to admit. Another thing to mention is that your teachers also fill out these tick boxes to classify you, and they're things like for creativity, for innovation, for academic performance. Is this student one of the best you've seen in your career? Are they outstanding? Are they above average? Things like that. And you want teachers who are most likely to give you the best I've seen in my career, or the second one, like outstanding or something, for as many of those traits and qualities. Another important thing to note is that when you submit your application, you generally should be waiving your rights to read your recommendation letters. So you have the ability to not waive this right, but if you don't, it looks really poorly on your application because it means you don't trust what your teachers are going to say. But you will be waiving your rights to read your recommendation letters, which means that your teachers are essentially there to verify the claims made in your application. So don't lie in your application, and also ask teachers who you trust to write the best for you. In terms of my tips for the recommendation letters, obviously there's not a lot you can do yourself, but firstly, spend your senior years being very active in the classes that you potentially will get your teacher to write your recommendation letters for. In year 11, you're not going to know which 2 teachers it is, so be active in every single class. Form a rapport with teachers who know you well, will speak well about you, and also importantly, I know this is a bit superficial, but teachers that can physically write well. Give your teachers plenty of time to write their letters. So for me, I asked all my recommendation letters early in year 12, and then send them a detailed recommendation letter guide. So mine were approximately 12 pages. And what this guide includes is basically what core values you want them to talk about, And this is to avoid recommendation letters overlapping too much. So I gave my different recommendation letters, teachers, different areas I wanted them to focus on so that there wasn't too much overlap. And also give them a list of extracurricular activities and other examples that they can refer to. For me personally, I had my principal, my English teacher, legal studies teacher, and then I used one of my optionals and I got my debating and public speaking teacher to write one. So try and avoid too much overlap. If you've got a lot of referees, obviously there are some parts they will have to overlap, but that letter is super important to tell each of them what you want them to focus on. The sixth part is your university specific section. So as I said, after you finish all the common parts of the Common App, which is sent to every school, each university has the opportunity to ask you to fill out some additional information for them. So some unis ask for another essay, some ask you to describe yourself in 3 words, and some ask for short questions. As of last year, Harvard has transitioned away from a second essay to 5 questions with a 200-word limit. And you can briefly read what those are, but they basically cover one activity, what do you want to use your education for, one question about your personality, what life experiences you have. For these short answers of the university specific part, I think just treat it the same way you treat your essay. Start early, draft your answers, get feedback on them, and edit. I think don't neglect this part of your application. You have the opportunity to maximize parts of the application you haven't talked about before. So avoid repeating things you've talked about in your essay. So for example, in my Harvard supplemental questions, I didn't mention debating because I did a whole personal essay about debating. So avoid overlap and instead showcase parts of your applications that haven't been explored in depth, either in your essay or recommendation letters. So for example, I talked about my decision to study English Extension 2 and why that was super important to me in the question about a time that your learning was like fulfilling or something, because that was something that really featured nowhere else in my application, but I thought would benefit if they knew about that. So make sure you maximize this part of your application and avoid overlap with what they've already been told. Now, some questions are very clearly designed for you to showcase your personality. Make sure you do this. So for example, Harvard and a lot of Ivy universities have a question about like top 3 things your roommate would like to know about you, or write a letter to your future roommate or things like that. That's not an opportunity to talk about your activities and your extracurriculars. Just be genuine as to like your interest, who you are as a person, showcase your personality. Those questions are specifically designed to test if you are someone who, has a, open personality, will be an active social participant on campus. There is technically a 7th part, which is interviews. But the reason I said there were 6 parts and not 7 initially is that interviews are not guaranteed for everyone, obviously, and you can get admitted without an interview. Whereas I think for the UK, you must have an interview to be admitted, whereas in the US, you don't necessarily need to do an interview. And when possible, you will be interviewed by an alumni. So it is conditional on alumni availability, but these top unis have very vast alumni networks all across the world. So more often than not, you might be able to get an interview. But as I said, it really is not a requirement. You can be admitted without one. There are different opinions as to whether or not getting a university means you're likely to get in. I think don't try and get into that much. Just if you get an interview, be grateful and don't waste the opportunities. The interview for the US is very different to the UK. It is very much so a personality, who are you based interview. And your interviewers don't have access to any part of your application file, at least for Harvard, but this is speaking to Harvard specifically. They only know your name and the school you went to. So because of that, don't be afraid to repeat information you submitted in your application because they don't have this information. And then make sure you're just communicating naturally. I think people try and over-prepare, and that can result in you sounding too scripted, and that's going to show through. So I did very little scripting of any answers. I think the one question I prepared for was why Harvard? Because there are very common questions that you can expect, such as tell me about yourself, why Harvard, or why this university. And at least for the why this university, I think that's one question you should definitely prepare for. If you can't give a very specific answer referring to specific parts of that university and their program and their college, that's going to look poorly on you. So doing a bit of research into the university itself will prepare you for that why us question. Tell me about yourself is quite common. But at the end of the day, the questions really all are guided towards sort of, I was asked things like, what leadership positions did you do? What interest did you have? Anything else you want to tell me? I was given free rein to talk to my interviewer, basically. Because at the end of the day, the US uni interviews are really just a conversation with someone who wants to get to know you. So treat it that way, treat it sort of casually. It's not a test or a grilling of you. It's a little bit more laid back and casual. They genuinely go for like roughly an hour. They can go longer, they can go shorter. It also depends on your interviewer. But yeah, just think of it as a conversation. One thing I do want to touch on is financial considerations and a few terms to be wary of. So the first is whether or not a uni is need blind. So if a university is need blind, it means that if you require financial aid or you required money to attend, basically, that won't affect your application. Universities that are not need blind, if you tick the box saying, I need financial aid, it makes it a bit harder for you to get in. You must be an exceptional candidate now because the university knows that if they admit you, they have to pay for you. Not all unis are need blind. Some are need blind for US citizens and permanent residents only. So check the policies for that. Another term is needs met. So a needs met university is one where they award financial aid not on the basis of merit. So it's not like if you have good grades, you get a scholarship. It's awarded on the basis of needs demonstrated. So you submit your financial documents to the university and they guarantee to meet all of the demonstrated need. So they'll determine how much money they think your family needs to make this affordable for you to attend, and they will subsidize that. Harvard is both needs blind and needs met for all students globally. I personally think it is one of the best, if not the best, financial aid program in the US because of this. So they don't care if you need financial aid. They will meet all of the needs that you have if you attend them. So I am on quite, significant financial aid as well because it is very expensive. But I think Harvard has one of the best financial aid programs in terms of no restrictions, basically. But that's obviously Harvard alone. You must conduct your own research. Each uni will have a different financial aid policies, and sometimes the policies will differ for domestic students from the US versus international students. So make sure you look through that clearly before you apply. Just some quick other stuff. Check whether or not you're required to declare a major. Most universities don't require you to declare a major. So you apply to the college, you don't have to apply to a law degree, for example. But sometimes they require you not to necessarily apply to that college, or maybe they do, or at least declare a major. And this might impact how you want to craft your application. So for example, if you're applying to a CS major, computer science, it makes sense to talk about informatics and computer science activities that you've done in school. For Harvard specifically, they require you to tell them your intended major, but it's not binding, and you can even tell them undecided if you want. It doesn't impact your application at all, basically. Whereas other universities, for example, Wharton, which is the business school at University of Pennsylvania, obviously that's geared towards finance. So having things like business society would be a really strong extracurricular for that. There is also an additional info section available on the Common App if you believe there's additional information you haven't been able to communicate to, to the admissions officers. I think only use this if you genuinely have extra stuff to say. I know some people think that not having a filled out additional info section is bad. Personally, I left mine completely blank. If you think there's extra information that will benefit, go ahead and use it, but you definitely don't have to. I didn't at all. In terms of what my number one tip is, you need to have a strong story or message that is the central thread throughout your application. This should link your activities and passions and essays all together. Doing 10 extracurriculars, for example, that are all unrelated doesn't show a genuine passion or interest in any of them. So the strongest applications I've seen are all ones that have a clear story or clear message they're trying to forward. You have to sell yourselves to these unis, basically. These unis want to know that you're passionate and motivated and will contribute to their campus. There's no one formula for how to get into an elite US uni. It's really just about being the best version of yourself and communicating that to the universities. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any specific questions about Harvard specifically, I'm always available for people to contact me, but I